Okay, excellent. I will say there is one, just to sort of backtrack a little bit, there is one caveat that I would say for an employer that maybe you don't want to have a handbook in place, is that if you're a small employer and you're just going to say, no matter what I put into place, we're just not going to pay any attention to it. You know, I mean, if you know yourself that well, I would say don't put into place policies and procedures you're not going to adhere to. I think that in general you should have a handbook and you should have certain types of policies and procedures, but if you're really, truly not going to adhere to them, then you don't want to put into place things that you're not going to follow, because that's just not helpful to the employer. So you've got a handbook in place. Everybody's got a handbook in place. A lot of times, you know, I'll talk to HR managers who change jobs, and they'll look and say, this handbook that the company has, some aspects of it are okay, but I think it needs to be updated. Come to me, need some help updating this handbook. Do we want to go with just updating the old handbook, or try to do something entirely new? And some of the factors I'd say is, you know, how up to date is it? Are we talking about a handbook that's 25 years old that doesn't really reflect the most current laws or business practices, or business terminology? And I'll be honest, sometimes it's easier for me just to start with a clean slate than try to, you know, fix a handbook that needs lots of revisions, because I've got lots of templates and things like that I can put together a brand new handbook pretty quickly, whereas trying to you know, prop up or substantially revise a handbook that needs lots of revisions, frankly, takes me a little longer sometimes than just starting from scratch. Another time that a new handbook might be appropriate if there's a change in philosophy or management. You can approach things from an entirely different perspective. Leah touched on at will. Believe it or not, there are some employers that do not try to, or that do modify the at will employment. They want to provide some level of job security. They think it provides a competitive advantage in some way when it comes to hiring to do that. And so if you've got new philosophies or a new approach to employment situations, then you might want to just start anew on the handbook. If you've got, one thing I say is, if you've got some changes that are pretty, you're going to be viewed pretty skeptically by your employees, but you've also got some things that they might benefit, you might want to do just a complete overhaul, so you're, you know, giving everything to them at once, so it's not highlighting the things that make them unhappy, the things that maybe you take away, certain benefits or things like that. Kind of you know, give the bad with some good too. So we're going to talk about some specific things. Every handbook's different, but we're going to talk about some types of policies that almost every handbook should either have or at least consider having. Right off the bat, you want an introductory section that sort of lays out what the purpose of the handbook is. Primary thing that we want to make sure we do whenever you put a handbook in place, if you want to preserve your at-will employment, and I generally advise employers to do that, it protects you against contract claims, is to be explicit that the handbook, nothing in the handbook changes the at-will employment relationship. Define at-will employment. I put together handbooks that have at-will language 5, 6, 7 times in the handbook, just to make it clear throughout the handbook that these policies are not changing the at-will employment. So you're going to address it right off the bat. You're going to address it in a progressive discipline policy that you have. If you've got some sort of guidelines around how you do progressive discipline, you want to make sure that there's at-will language that allows you to deviate from that general way in which you do things. But you know, at-will should show up 3 or 4 times. Think of it like that old marketing adage, you have to say it 7 times before it sinks into somebody. Maybe you do that in your handbook as well. You want to make sure that the company reserves the right to modify or revoke or suspend any of its policies at any time without advance notice, that you have the opportunity to change policies when you need to do that based on business needs or developments and things like that, that you're not locking yourself into place, and that this handbook is really a guideline for how you're going to generally approach issues, but it doesn't contractually obligate you to follow any specific provision. believe in here we've got some boilerplate language at the back, and I've got some at-will type language, and I can't remember if I've got an introductory section, but those are the things that you want to address right off the bat, and you want to put some of this language like the at-will, you want to make it conspicuous, put it in bold, you know. At-will employment, this does not create a contract. Another type of policy that you might want to consider is employer records. And I would classify this as one of those policies that maybe you don't have to have, but it really helps your supervisors a lot to know how you are going to maintain records and what type of records they should be keeping. And so, you know, one of the problems that I see with employers, sometimes they have these personnel handbooks. They will mix medical records into the personnel file. That is a HIPAA violation. You want to make sure that you keep medical records separate from the regular personnel file. And for each employee, once you have medical records, things like FMLA certifications or things of that nature, that's kept in a separate medical file. This may seem common sense, but it comes up a lot. You know, if you've got litigation records or things like that, have a separate file that's not part of that. I sometimes get in, you know, have a client that, you know, we have it, you know, there's a lawsuit, and I say send over the employee's personnel file, and I start to see emails from me in there. You don't want that. You know, we don't want things in the personnel file that that might waive attorney-client privilege or that, you know, have anything to do with litigation. It should be so the records that you want to have in a personnel file, you want to have your employment documents. And when I say employment documents, things like your I-9s, your W-4s, the documents that you're required to have at the time of hiring. You want to make sure that you have change notices, that when there's been a raise or a history of any sort of action that's been taken that affects the employer's terms and conditions of employment. That, you know, I like when I get an employee personnel file that I want to be able to see, you know, what is the history of this employee's pay, what is their promotion history, what are their performance evaluations, and I get a complete and accurate picture of what they have that they've had. You want any forms acknowledging receipt of handbooks. If you know, it's one of the things that we advise doing is that when you hire a new employee and you issue them the handbook, have them acknowledge receipt of that handbook and that they've had the opportunity to review and understand it. That way, you've got that acknowledgement if there's an issue about whether they knew what the policies were. And this comes up a lot of times in like unemployment type claims, right? Where you've got an employee who's filing for unemployment who said, I never knew that, you know, 3 tardies were going to get me a written warning, and I didn't know that. Well, if you have the employee handbook acknowledgement that says that they've acknowledged that they've received the handbook and that they've reviewed it and understand it, that cuts against that claim. The last thing I'll say about employer records is whether you have it in the handbook or just internally in your HR department, you want to have some process that describes how you're going to handle employees who want to review their personnel file. In general, I encourage employers to let their employees review their personnel files. That gives them the opportunity to correct it if there's missing documents or if there's things that they think are included in an employee handbook that shouldn't be. Sometimes, you know, policies you may have a disciplinary policy that says that if you've gotten a write-up and no other write-up in 6 months, that we're going to pull it out of the personnel file. Employees will look for that sort of thing and will help you correct that. That said, I would have a procedure where the employee requests to review their personnel file and that you're present for that review of the personnel file, or you have somebody that's there. I don't know how many cases I've had where, you know, I get the employee personnel file and say, where is this performance reviewed? We got one. Well, it should have been in there, but I think they took it when they looked at the handbook or took it out, or, you know, and you hate to, you know, sort of suspect that will happen, but I'd always have somebody present so that people aren't pulling things or slipping things into personnel files that shouldn't be there.
All right.
Pass the baton.
Yeah.